Josiah Whitmore, a weathered rancher of 58, had seen evil in many forms during his long life, but nothing prepared him for the sight in the dusty town square that morning. A young blonde woman, barely 19, stood chained to a wooden post like livestock. Her tattered dress hung in rags, and her blue eyes were hollow with despair. The auctioneer's voice sliced through the air. "What am I bid for this fine piece?" "Strong, young, perfect for any work you've got in mind." The crowd of men laughed, their eyes cruel and hungry. Josiah's hands tightened on his horse's reins, knuckles whitening. He thought of the war, the principles he'd fought for. This wasn't supposed to happen anymore. But the girl's silent sobs told him some battles never end. The bidding started at $20. The girl, called Ella Laner by someone in the crowd, kept her eyes on the ground, her wrists raw from shackles, dried blood marking her skin. $50, shouted a fat man with a tobacco-stained beard. Ella Laner flinched, trying to cover herself as the bids climbed. Josiah's jaw clenched. Someone had stolen this girl from her life, reducing her to this moment of humiliation. Bartholomew Kane, the auction's orchestrator, stood nearby, his black coat pristine, his boots polished. He profited from others' suffering. 3 armed men flanked him, hands on their gun belts, daring anyone to interfere. Josiah had ridden into town for supplies, planning to return to his ranch by sunset. But watching Ella Laner struggle to hold on to her dignity, something shifted in him. The fire that had carried him through battle reignited. $60, going once, the auctioneer called, raising his gavel. Ella Laner's legs buckled, but she caught herself against the post. A tear cut through the dust on her face. Then Josiah's voice boomed, $100. The square fell silent. Heads turned. The gavel froze. Ella Laner's eyes met his, a flicker of hope mixing with fear. Kane's smile faltered briefly before widening. He whispered to one of his men, who slipped into the crowd. Josiah noticed but kept his focus on Ella Laner. Well, Kane said, stepping forward. $100 is serious money, stranger. You sure you know what you're buying? Josiah dismounted, his boots thudding on the wooden boards. Each step felt like walking toward a cliff. He thought of his late wife, Sarah, who'd never turn away from someone in need. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he said, pulling out a pouch heavy with coins. The clink of metal echoed as he counted $100. "For the girl's freedom." Kane's laugh was cold. "Freedom? You're buying property, like everyone else." Ella Laner's chains rattled as she shifted, hope and fear warring in her eyes. She'd learned not to trust promises. Josiah set the money on the table. "Take off her chains." Kane's tone hardened. "Hold on. There's a town tax, $20. Handling fee, $15. Registration papers." He was stalling. The crowd grew restless, sensing trouble. Josiah felt the tension, the air thick with the promise of violence. His hand drifted toward his gun. "Skip the paperwork. Let her go." Kane's eyes narrowed. He recognized a dangerous man in Josiah's steady stance and calm voice. Ella Laner watched, terrified. She'd seen what happened to those who crossed Kane. The last person who tried to help her had vanished. Kane's smile returned, calculated. "I like you, stranger. You've got backbone. Help me with a problem, and you can have the girl." He gestured to the bank across the square. "Someone spreading rumors my business isn't legitimate. Hurts my feelings. Deliver this note to the bank, get what's written on it, and we're done." Josiah took the folded paper, knowing it was a trap. It was either a robbery demand or protection money. If he complied, he'd be an accomplice. If he refused, Ella Laner would suffer. Her wrists bled, her left leg trembled from an injury. Leaving her to Kane's mercy wasn't an option. "And if I refuse?" he asked. Kane's smile widened. My boys have itchy trigger fingers. This girl's seen too much. Easier to start fresh with a new batch. The crowd thinned, sensing bloodshed. Josiah opened the note. It demanded $500 from the bank's safe, signed with his name, Josiah Whitmore. Cain knew who he was, had planned this from the moment Josiah arrived. How do you know my name? Josiah asked. Cain chuckled. Josiah Whitmore, Double W Ranch, 20 miles north. Lost his wife 2 years ago. Keeps to himself. You ain't invisible, old man. I know who's got money. Ella Laner's dread deepened. Cain had done this to her father, using information to manipulate and destroy. Josiah was next. Here's the plan, Cain said. You deliver the note. The bank thinks it's a withdrawal. But the sheriff's been tipped about a desperate rancher planning trouble. When you walk out with the cash, he arrests you for robbery. You hang, I get the money as evidence, and your ranch when the bank forecloses. The girl testifies you forced her, then disappears. The trap was airtight. Josiah glanced at Ella Laner, who subtly nodded toward an alley behind the bank. Shadows moved, more of Cain's men, cutting off escape. You're running out of time, Cain said, checking his watch. Sheriff's here in 10 minutes. Josiah weighed his options. A gunfight risked Ella Laner's life. A distraction wouldn't fool Cain. Then he remembered Sarah's words, sometimes the best way to win is to change what you're fighting about. All right, Josiah said, pocketing the note. I'll do it, but I know something you don't. That bank's moving federal army payroll today. Steal from them, and you're not just robbing farmers, you're crossing the U.S. government. Cain paled. Federal crimes meant marshals, tribunals, and no escape. You're lying, he said, but his eyes darted to the bank, where extra guards stood and the manager checked his watch nervously. Josiah pressed his advantage. Let the girl go, we walk away, and no one explains a slave auction to federal marshals. Cain drew his gun, aiming at Ella Laner's head. I don't leave witnesses. The hammer's click echoed. Ella Laner closed her eyes, bracing for death. Josiah's hand twitched toward his gun, too slow to stop Cain. Then hooves thundered, and blue-uniformed federal cavalry rode into the square, led by Captain Morrison. Cain lowered his gun but didn't holster it, his men frozen in uncertainty. What's the situation? Morrison demanded, eyeing Ella Laner's chains and the armed men. Cain forced a smile. Just business, Captain. Nothing federal. Morrison dismounted, his gaze locking on Ella Laner's wounds. What kind of business shackles a woman in public? Josiah stepped forward. He's running slave auctions, Captain. Selling kidnapped people for months. Cain's facade cracked. She owes me money. Legal debt collection. Morrison wasn't fooled. Sergeant, cut her chains. As the chains fell, Josiah steadied Ella Laner. Cain backed toward his horse, desperate. This is a misunderstanding. I've got papers. Morrison's eyes hardened. Show them to a federal judge. Arrest him. Cain drew his gun, aiming at Morrison. Nobody's arresting anybody. My men control this town. Chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded as Cain's men and the cavalry clashed. Josiah shielded Ella Laner behind the platform. Through the chaos, he saw Cain fleeing toward his horse. Morrison raised his rifle, firing. Cain stumbled, blood staining his coat, but he mounted and spurred his horse away. Morrison ordered his men to pursue, but Josiah focused on Ella Laner. You're safe now, he said. Her eyes, no longer hollow, held gratitude and resolve. The cavalry rounded up Cain's men as the square fell silent. Ella Laner whispered, "Thank you." Josiah nodded, knowing some battles were worth fighting, no matter the cost.